Hello, and welcome to the Narrowing Path, Walking the Spiritual Walk. My name is Steve Van Eiderstein. Thank y'all for joining me again tonight, and I look forward to reading the next chapter of I Was a Pagan by V.C. Kitchen with you. I believe we're on chapter 9. Let me check. Yep, chapter 9, called The Business of Living the Other Way Around. And I will be reading it from an original, I don't think it's a first edition actually, but a printing from 1934, labeled I Was a Pagan by V.C. Kitchen. You can also, if you want to follow along and mark it up a little bit with some highlighting and everything like that, you can get Believing in False Gods, I Was a Pagan by V.C. Kitchen. This is just a facsimile reprint for New Age readers and gives them something to put a pen on and a highlighter too, which I appreciate. So I'm looking forward to it. We've been talking a lot about the last chapter was about a new orientation to life and a new engagement with life and what that looked like and effect and power that can have. And it was a beautiful chapter and I loved it, and I related to it quite a bit of it, and I hope you all did too. So I am looking forward to getting this chapter read and then reviewed next weekend. So I hope everyone, by the way, celebrates is enjoying the upcoming holiday in a few days, and is maybe even getting some time off. So I hope y'all join me in this chapter reading. So here we go. This is the 9th chapter of I Was a Pagan by V.C. Kitchen. Chapter 9. This business of living the other way round. Redirection. In the post-war days of dizzy peaks and dizzier slumps, I decided I was living in a world turned upside down. I now see, however, that it was I who was upside down. In most areas of my life, I let myself be guided by a force that was pulling in the very opposite direction from God. Forces working in opposite directions nullify each other. That, I think, is why the selfish indulgence of my desires canceled out their own satisfaction. That is why my self-directed thinking led nowhere, either for myself or others. And since both my senses and my understanding were continuously dulled by backpedaling against God, they were never sharpened to the point of sensitivity needed for a spiritual experience. As I tried to explain in my last chapter, God handled these blocks in the physical area of my life by removing sensuous desire. He stopped the flow of my misdirected forces and gave me his force to flow within me unopposed. Thus I found the peace that comes when conflict ceases, and I found that joy that comes through sharpened senses and a righted understanding when these subjects of the human will are subjected to God's will instead, and brought within the pattern of his plan and within the consciousness of his affection. I did not, however, stop there. The purpose of the Oxford group is to hold one always to the highest, and they did not let me hesitate halfway. I'll read that again. The purpose of the Oxford group is to hold one always to the highest, and they did not let me hesitate halfway. The Oriental mystic, for example, is content to submerge himself in God just to gain cessation of desire and the peace and joy that self-forgetfulness invariably brings. But the Oxford group is a Christian body, and Christian mystics are working mystics. They seek God, not joy. And they submerge themselves in God, not so much for the happiness that results, as for the usefulness. They seek contact with God in order to implant his purpose in and transmit his power to the lives of others, and thus, individual by individual, to bring about regeneration of the world. I could not, therefore, stop the mere cessation of my old desires, nor linger to bask in the new peace and joy thus gained. Identification with the Oxford group meant my acceptance of the new desire Christ wanted to plant in place of the old. And it meant taking up the new direction he gave to my life when I permitted his force to flow unopposed. I became most definitely conscious of this new direction one night as I was praying some 6 months after my change. I realized that my prayer had been little but wistful thinking, that I had prayed God chiefly to bring about the things I wanted, in the way I wanted them to come. I then and there asked God to take over my prayer and guide it so that I might pray for what he wanted to bring about, and so that he might use me for that purpose, instead of my trying to use him. While I was praying for the things I wanted, the force of my own desires seemed to gather within me. It generated from the wish of my being and flowed upward and outward as though I were broadcasting my wish to God and asking him to do something about it. The moment that I asked him to take over, however, the flow definitely stopped, and then it started in the opposite direction. At that moment, I became distinctly conscious of a force flowing through me. It was as though an idea generated outside of me had been broadcast from space, entering my mind and flowing downward to become the wish of my being. I was not only changed, but I had completely turned around. Before this, in other words, I had been passively obedient to God. I was now put actively and creatively to work for God. And while with my first surrender, my life had been greatly altered, this new surrender completed the reversal that started me in a direction which lay absolutely opposite to all my old ways. I took up a redirected path, not only in the physical or sensuous environment, but in all the social, intellectual, and spiritual, volitional areas of my life. In the physical area, as already suggested, I used to be guided only by the pull of my desire for a sensual indulgence. I would boorishly, for instance, refuse to give or to go out for an evening party unless I saw there's some chance to excite my senses through conquests at bridge, to dull my senses through the conquests of more alcohol than others could drink, or to gratify my senses through flirting with some lady who was not my wife. Today I give parties or go to them, not because I hope for sensual excitement, but because God has told me to do so. He tells me to give or go to a party because at that party, he has some definite and creative work for me to do. It may be, such as in the old days, that he guides me to a party simply because he knows I need the rest or relaxation I will find there. I am seldom, however, as tired as in the old days. More often, I believe, God guides me to a party to show my old crowd that giving one's life to God does not make one queer. It is to show them that working modern Christians do not become down-in-the-mouth cranks, but that they actually outlove the pagans. Again, and this seems usually the case, God may guide me to a party because he knows some man or woman will be there who is in need of a spiritual need. He knows some man or woman will be there who is in spiritual need. He knows that my experience and victories in Christ will help them. He guides me when to speak and whom to speak to, and thus uses me to win another person to his kingdom. Stupid as this may seem to those who have not tried it, I can assure you that going to a party to make a conquest for Christ is far more exciting, satisfying, and gratifying than any of my old attempts to make a conquest of my own. I can even, these days, put on my evening clothes and go with a smile to parties that my wife used to have to drag me to if I consented to go at all. Following God's guidance is by no means a drearily submissive form of obedience. It is something you can always do willingly and gladly. God, in fact, has never called upon me to do anything without giving me the power, courage, words, wisdom, money, love, patience, foresight, stimulation, or whatever else I might need to accomplish the desired result. Just as in my BC days, I never faced unpleasant things without a hip flask to see me through. God never calls me to do difficult or boring tasks without giving me the new spirit to take the place of that flask and to do it and to do 1,000% better job. This redirection of old desires and substitution for old stimuli has extended not only through my sensual life, but into my social and intellectual life as well. It enters into all of my thinking, into all of my dealings with other people. When, for instance, I only thought about God, when he existed only in my mind as a belief, I could reach him only as an intellectual conclusion. I concluded that there must be some higher power to account for all the things taking place in space, much as scientists concluded that there must be an atom to account for all things taking place in physics. Knowing him only as a conclusion, however, I could only conclude what he wanted me to do in my relations with other people. And since these conclusions took place entirely in my own mind, I usually concluded that I was just about perfect, but that something should be done about other people to make the world a more comfortable background for my personal exploits, and to remove the various obstructionists who disturbed the even tenor of my ways. Even before I was married, I had decided to reform my future wife. I decided, among many other changes obviously needed, that I would bring her up to my intellectual level, in order that she might form an intelligent and complementary foil to my philosophical discourses during the anticipated long winter evenings. Once, however, she fell asleep as I, reading aloud, waded through the 4th volume of A History of Civilization. I decided to abandon the attempt and contented myself in later years with merely pointing out her faults. She should, I told her, check her tongue a bit. She should speak less sharply to the children. She should prove less diligent in inventing tiresome errands for me. She should look with greater tolerance on my drinking companions and with less interest on social affairs. She should spend less money on practically everything and keep the children from pounding the piano and playing the radio simultaneously while I was giving the world the benefit of my great wisdom and trying to write. Everything, I was sure, would turn out much better if she would correct these erroneous ways, and everything would have been much better for my ego. Nothing, however, would have happened in the world I was so nobly trying to help, and nothing would have happened in my wife. Here, I think, has been my most conspicuous redirection. I see now the utter futility of trying to reform the other fellow without starting to reform myself. I see the utter uselessness of trying to work out systems which would solve the world's economic and social problems if I myself am of such a nature that no system whatever, other than self-satisfaction, could work out for me. I therefore no longer tell my wife to check her tongue. I, as God directs and empowers me, check my own. And when I find myself, not my wife, speaking sharply to the children, I realize that it is because some element of selfishness is not yet dead within me, and that I have further surrenders to make. When I see her spending too much money, I realize that I have been too preoccupied to seek guidance in the matter with her, or too utterly lazy to sit down with her and work out the budget by which God wants us to expand his funds. As for drinking companions, I no longer happen to drink, while, as for society, we both have learned to turn to people of worth, rather than to think how much they are worth. Let me read that again. As for drinking companions, I no longer happen to drink, while, as for society, we both have learned to turn to people of worth rather than to think of how much they are worth, and to move in circles where God has use for us, rather than with the people we still think we can use. That's an awesome paragraph. In still larger circles, the world of society as a whole, I am learning to think and move, and in the same redirected way, I am learning as someone who has said that the soul of reformation is a reformation of the soul. I am learning that I cannot give to society what I have not got myself. I am learning that I have nothing worth giving to society except what Christ has given to me. And only when I tell what Christ has done for me, and thus tempt men towards the same change in their own lives, have I done any creative work in this business of living, or been of any use in this sorely troubled world. The same sort of redirection has been brought about in the spiritual volitional side of my nature. The force of self-will no longer runs contrary to God's will to set up life plans and ideals that can block the purposes of Christ. My principal life plan, for instance, was to build a wall of impregnable economic security around myself and then step inside to rot at leisure. I intended to make my business tremendously successful so that when I retired, I could continue to draw substantial income from my firm without doing any further work. Just as a sideline, I expected to make a fortune in the stock market while looking towards an anticipated inheritance out of the other corner of my economic eye, and equally sure that handsome royalties would pour in from the great books I was going to write. Today, there's not a single stone left standing in this economic wall. I have learned that life plans are nothing but a block to God's plans, and that the only economic security is found in, "Give us this day our daily bread." The same crash had come to my ideals, and that, I think, was even harder both to understand and to stand for. I once, for instance, worked out that perfect plan for helping fallen humanity. It was a plan involving charity on the part of big-hearted men like myself. Instead of the diminishing returns usually obtained from the charity dollar, however, my plan multiplied returns and made it possible for the poor to earn $8 for every dollar that was given. It gave jobs instead of a dole. At the same time, it reclaimed the derelict, rehabilitating men as well as multiplying dollars. Proudly, I fought for this ideal, diverting much of my newfound God-given power to this worthy cause. I had to learn, however, that man-made ideals, like man-made plans, are nothing but a block to God's plans. They are our hope for the other fellow's redemption through his adoption of our views. But the acceptance of another man's views or the acceptance of his systems has never redeemed anybody. Never will. As long as men form their own plans and hold empty ideals, as long as they devise mere systems, as long as they conclude in their own minds what a God they have never met would have them do, the world would be safe for dreamers, theorists, idealists, sentimentalists, crooks, idlers, and the devil. But it will not be safe for the building of the kingdom of God until those who have turned in the opposite direction persuade enough others to turn in the same way. This whole change in the direction of my life can best, perhaps, be illustrated through a version of the game Truth, taught me by a member of the Oxford group. You write down 5 things you honestly like most in life. And you write down 5 things you most hate. Then, if any change has come into your life, you write them down again to show the comparison between your old life and the new. This is how the game works out for me. In my old life, I most liked myself, liquor, tobacco, and almost every other stimulant, narcotic, and form of self-indulgence. Anything which gave me pleasure, possessions, power, position, and applause, or pumped up my self-esteem. To be left largely to myself. My wife, because of the comforting and complimentary way she treated me. In my new life, I most like God, time alone with God, the fellowship of the living Jesus Christ, the stimulation of the Holy Spirit and the wisdom of God's guidance. My wife, because of the things God now enables us to do for each other. Communion with others who are trying to lead the same kind of Christ-centered life and witnessing to all of what Christ has come to mean to me. I hated most poverty for myself, prohibition, work, people who disapproved or tried to interfere with me, any betrayal of my inner thoughts or emotions. This was for his old life. And what he hates most in his new life, sin, self, because I is the middle letter of sin. Sins that separate me from God, sins that separate me from people, anything that falls short of God's plan for me. This, I think you will agree, suggests quite a reversal in life's motives. Some of my old friends, of course, say they liked me better the old way. I did at that time fit more comfortably into their particular picture, but I am now trying to fit into the pattern of God. Whether it is comfortable or not, that pattern is, so far as I am able, directing my entire life, not only in my relations with the physical universe and with other people, but in the departments of everyday living, in education, in marriage, in my business, in social work, in politics, and in the church. That concludes chapter 9. That was a great chapter. That's going to be a long chapter review, let me tell you, because there is a lot in there by way of guidance as how to perceive new things, like the redirection, right? The replacement of his desires, the way that we I like the way he illustrated, we don't take what we think is right and put it into the world. We ask this God of our understanding and this power greater than ourselves to show us what we need to be doing and put that into the world, right? And like anything that comes from me is usually based on self. Any of my best ideas are usually have a lot of me involved to get in the way. And I gotta say, I love that inventory he did at the end. He showed us a little bit about the 5 things I liked most in my old life and I hated in my own life, and then the 5 things I like most in my new life and hate in my new life. Like, it shows a substantial difference, and I know for me to write it down and actually do that right now for myself would be it would show a distinct transformation in how I thought and what I valued. So it's pretty cool. I loved that chapter. It was a realigning chapter for me, actually, and I really appreciate being able to read it right now and go through that. So I hope you all enjoyed it as well. I appreciate it, and thank you all for joining me as we go through and finish this book. We are over halfway through, by the way, just over, but over halfway through. This book's taken a little bit longer than the last ones, and I hope you have found as much benefit from it as I have. So I'm looking forward to finishing this up in the beginning of next year. So thank you all for joining me tonight, though. And I will join you again next weekend to do the review. So until next time, thanks.